Hello guys, I'm Vivian and today I'm representing the OpenBuild community to do the interview with the CTO of Hyperlane. So could you do a brief intro about yourself, like your background and what brought you to crypto?
Hey, thanks for having me. So my name is Nam, Nam Hoai. I'm one of the co-founders of Hyperlane. I'm leading the technical side of things. We've been doing that for 3 years. How I got into crypto was, I guess now 6 years ago. My best friend, he started working as the first employee on Cello. And so at the time, I just moved to San Francisco and I was like, hey, I don't know what to do next. And to be honest, I was kind of like a little bit weirded out by crypto, but I remember meeting the team and I was very excited about the team. And that's kind of how my journey started in crypto.
Interesting. So because right now you are building Hyperlane, you mentioned for more like 3 years, right? Yeah, so could you do a brief intro about Hyperlane and your original intention and also the vision behind the project?
Yeah, I think the vision behind Hyperlane kind of got based on this idea of, there's going to be many chains out there, right? Like when I was at Cello, one of the kind of, we launched mainnet and then what we realized was like, oh, how do users come to Cello, right? Like they need a way to come from other blockchains. And so that's obviously what bridges, interoperability protocols are for. And we just kind of as we were looking at the market, we just realized, look, there's going to be many, many more chains, right? Like I think in 2018, 2020, everybody kind of thought oh, there's going to be one blockchain to rule them all, right? One L1. That's why everybody was trying to race to build these L1s. But I think we were lucky that we realized that, I think for crypto to fulfill its vision of being this kind of the decentralized application infrastructure, you need a lot more block space than a single blockchain can provide. And so in that world of many blockchains, what becomes very important is how these blockchains talk to each other. And so that's what motivated us to work on Hyperlane. And actually, by extension, what we realized is, even at the time, there were maybe 10 or 20 blockchains that were pretty big, right? And that's what a lot of interoperability protocols of that generation thought about, right? Hey, how do we build an interoperable protocol for 10 or 20 or 30 or even 50 chains? But we just believe in a world of many thousands of chains. And so in that world, you can't have a single service provider basically connect all of these chains, right? The same with the internet, right? We don't have a single networking provider for all of the internet. What you need is an open permissionless protocol that when you launch your own blockchain, when you bring up your new server, you can get connected to this wider network of blockchains. And that's what we've been focusing on with Hyperlane.
Got it. So actually, this remind me about the Cosmos. I think So they have the kind of the similar thesis, right? And the communication between different chains are really important nowadays. And so if you want to introduce Hyperlane just in one sentence, to your grandmom, what would that be?
Oh man, it's difficult. I feel like my parents still don't really know what I do, but let me try. So I think Hyperlane is a open and permissionless. That's an important part. Permissionless interoperability framework that basically allows chains and asset issuers to connect to whatever chains they want, by themselves. And if they want to use a service, they can use our service as well.
Got it. And so talking about the cross-chain bridges, there are some challenges that people are really focusing on, like the security, liquidity, and also interoperability. So how Hyperlane address those issues?
Yeah, I think the thing that definitely we realize as well 3 years in is interop is a pretty hard problem, right? It's effectively a subset of the generalized Oracle problem, where just the remote data is just a blockchain and not just an arbitrary server data. I think the Oracle problem, it's very hard to solve it. And so from our perspective, it just requires a lot of infrastructure and abstractions to make it easy to use, while recognizing that security is very hard, right? And so one of the kind of key approaches that we've taken is that we know that there's no such thing as the single best way of like verifying like a message from an origin chain. There's going to be very different ones, right? Like maybe right now we start with a lot of like validator-based systems, right? Like where like you have specific entities that you trust that basically say that something happened on a remote chain. But also there's a lot of, right, obviously very good research about like ZK-based approaches, rollups in general. And so we just believe that those will take time. Like there's a lot of research, a lot of money going into those. And what we wanted to build is like a framework to allow developers to basically build once, and then as these kind of like innovations occur with these different mechanisms, they can just switch out the like security module, as we call it. And so that basically allows independent innovation at the app layer from the innovation layer, right? And so that's kind of been like a, I would say, key focus of ours. And then the second one is, like I mentioned, the permissionless angle, which basically is like, right, like if you launch a new chain, like let's say you launch Vivian chain today, right, like you now need, again, connection to, right, like the existing users on different chains. And right now a lot of other of our competitors, they're basically like, right, like you have to find their BD team, they will probably charge you a lot of money for it. And so Hyperlane is basically, yeah, this completely open, completely permissionless protocol that like you can deploy Vivian, you can deploy Hyperlane to Vivian chain yourself and get connectivity. And again, that's kind of like mirrors, I would say, the like open approach of the internet, right? Where like you don't need to talk to somebody to get connected to other computers.
So actually, I think you mentioned permissionless a lot, right? So do you gonna like sacrifice the user experience to achieve permissionless?
Yeah, so this is, I think, the thing that maybe we sometimes struggle with communicating because, like, just because it's permission, like basically we know we want to keep it always permissionless, right? Like if you cannot find a way to talk to us, or for whatever reason we like don't find a way to talk to you, like you should be able to do it yourself. But that being said, we very much, right, like have a service that we do for people, right? Like where the user experience is basically like you come to us, you tell us like, hey, here's Vivian chain, and we actually do all the work for you, right? And so it's very similar to, let's say, right, like, I don't know, like Kubernetes, right? Like you can go to Google and Google does everything for you. But if you want to, you can host Kubernetes yourself, right? The same with like, if you build like a Next.js app, right? Like, yes, you can host it yourself, but Vercel does everything for you. And so we think there's kind of this good like two-sided way of thinking about it where like, hey, in the happy case, the service does everything for you, but you know that like if you ever, right, like feel like, hey, we're getting bad or like we are like charging you too much money, you can host it yourself.
Okay, got it. I think so. This is the reason why you like to mention yourself as a tool instead of the applications, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's this weird thing where like I think right, like we want to basically be like, it's similar to like a SaaS product, for example, right? Where like you don't even have to talk to us, you click a button, you get it, right? But I think what's important, right, like because interop is like a very important base layer, and so what's important is that like people know that like if they don't like their service provider, they can move away from the service provider, right? Like what you don't want to get in this situation where you're like a vendor locked, right, into like a particular provider, and then you're just at the mercy of their business decisions. And so that's why we kind of keep emphasizing the permissionless angle, right? Is that's why we use blockchains in the first place, right? Like you can deploy an application onto Ethereum, and nobody can stop you, right? Like nobody can like impact your product experience. But like with a lot of interop providers, right? Like you use their service, and then if they don't like you, they could just kill your application, right? And that's just like very, and from our perspective, very anti this space, and so that's why we emphasize the permissionless angle so much.
Got it. And so there's just actually a bonus question. So actually, so a lot of people talking about the intent bridge, like across, right? And I think they also collaborate with Uniswap, so Uniswap X. So what's the difference between like you guys and those kind of intent bridges? Because they've always mentioned like they are the fastest and also the lowest phase bridge.
Yeah, we've been spending a lot of time with intents. I'm sure we maybe get into it later. We've been working with the Ethereum Foundation and others on the Open Intents framework. But maybe before we get into that, I think fundamentally speaking, right, like Hyperlane kind of started as a message bridge, right? So basically like, and typically what it's used in a token bridge context is that like there's a smart contract which receives a message to then basically mint a new token. And then you can, right, like build liquidity bridges with like on-chain liquidity pools on top of it. intents are kind of a way to basically offload a lot of the responsibility to a solver who kind of like fills the user intent, and then the solver gets repaid later. And like I think one big benefit from that is that the solver can basically take on the finality risk, right? Versus like in message bridges, it's the like underlying security module that has to like absorb that finality risk. And so intents have this kind of potential to be like a much faster and potentially even nicer user experience, because as a user, you don't have to specify basically which path you want to take. You just say like, hey, I want this asset on that chain, and like the solver does it for you. I think, yeah, intents are super interesting, which is why we've been working with on the open intents framework. But they also have like one kind of like pretty large downside, which is that you require this like off-chain actor in the form of the solver to do a lot of work. And I think, I've been spending a lot of time in this kind of product category, and yeah, definitely finding those solvers is like a very underappreciated task.
Got it. And maybe we talked about the technical part, and maybe we're gonna talk about the marketing part. So like compared to the other bridges like Wormhole and Layer 0, so you guys feels like more technical driven, right? And haven't put so much efforts on their marketing side, especially in the APAC area. So, and Chinese community are really concerned about like your upcoming marketing strategy and also the roadmaps.
Yes, I think it's a common feedback that we get, and like some people might even say like that's good feedback in the sense that like you generally want to be, I guess, like solid tech and like bad marketing than maybe in the inverse. But yeah, like we definitely recognize that, especially in APAC, I think we have a lot of like room for improvement of like awareness, especially, right? Like I think last year when I went to Token in Singapore, there's definitely like a lot of folks that I've talked to that were like, hey, I like really wish I heard about you like 6 months ago when I started talking with some of these other providers. And so, yeah, like I think, we're mostly based out in New York and London. And so I think it's definitely like somewhat of a far travel for us. But part of why I'm here, part of why we're talking is definitely a recognition that, yeah, we need to do better here. I think we think this, especially this permissionless angle, right, of allowing builders to get connected without having to, again, talk to the BD teams of Western projects, I think is a very nice value prop, but it's only a value prop if people know about it. And so, yeah, hopefully some of the things that we have in the pipeline help Hyperlane and builders on top of Hyperlane get more exposure to, I think, the APAC and Chinese market. But honestly, if people have feedback, we will happy to hear it.
So like you mentioned a lot about the builders, right? And so do you have any like specific plan of how you guys gonna incentivize builder in the future?
Yes, so this is something that we actually just recently announced last week about kind of like our plans with respect to the Hyper token, and like one of the really key parts of that plan is what we call expansion rewards. So the idea is that like again in this kind of like open and permissionless network, who's creating the value of that network? It's the builders who are building these applications that use the underlying infrastructure, right? And like creating these network effects. And so as part of the expansion rewards, basically both the app builders as well as their users are basically receiving part of their missions as they're kind of like using Hyperlane messages themselves. And that's not just for, right, like that's kind of how we've applied the airdrop retroactively, but also how it will be going forward, right? Like every quarter, there will basically be a distribution that goes towards the applications and the users who use Hyperlane the most. And that's hopefully like, yeah, one way of incentivizing basically more usage on top of Hyperlane.
Got it. And so a lot of people just said that we've already entered the bear market, right? And I think so Hyperland raised, I think in 2022, just FTX collapsed, right? Yeah. So what's your like? Are there any like different strategies between the bear market and bull market?
Yeah, I think there definitely are. I as a builder, honestly, don't like people will kill me for this, but I actually prefer a bear market oftentimes because right, like there's less distractions, right? In a bull market, everything is going up, and like I think it's hard for people to kind of like tell substance from hype, and I think in the bear market you just kind of like crowd like right, like a lot of the like noisy people kind of like leave. And I think that gives, less distractions and allows builders, to build. And so we believe in some ways that like a bear market, can be helpful in that regard. But obviously, you need there to be enough incentive and activity in the overall market to have it be interesting for people, right? Like ultimately, like interoperability is certainly a category that is very much dependent on like whether people are generally excited about doing stuff on chain, and so definitely eventually we'll need a bull market. But yeah, right now there's just so much going on that like honestly sometimes I don't mind like a bit of a slowdown. But yeah, no, I think for us at Hyperlane, I don't think there's like the bear market. It doesn't impact us too much because yeah, again for us it's like building tools for developers.
But I think like compared to last bear market in 2022, I think during that period people just talked about like infrastructure, right? Like layer 1, layer 2 bridges, like data availability, etc. And right now, I think people more focusing on the application side, like pump farm, meme coins, etc. Right? And how do you think about these kind of changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think, I think obviously as infra project, a lot of times people always complained about like, oh, why another infra project? And, as somebody who's worked on a more application-focused project before, like, the reason why a lot of people worked on infra is because when you were building an app, you ended up having to build a lot of infra for yourself, right? And so that's when you just like learned about the pain of like, hey, it's actually pretty hard to build an application because this is not figured out, right? Like interop is not figured out. So like you end up kind of reinventing the wheel a lot. And so I'm super glad to hear, right, that like your experience right now is that like actually, we're like seemingly out of the interface and there's more and more applications being built. But that's only possible because we've invested all of the infrastructure, right, that like allow like accounts or like bridging, chain abstraction, all of those things to kind of become much easier for an app developer so that an app developer can only focus on the app and doesn't have to do infrastructure.
And as a builder, so what would you like to say to other builders or builders on the Hyperlane?
It's a big question. What do I want builders? I think. What do I want builders to? I think what I would want builders, I guess, maybe to like. Selfishly for me, I would love to hear feedback, right? Like basically, like hey, like as you said, I think it would be great if right, like app builders no longer have to think about infrastructure, and like right, like a lot of infrastructure should be there for people to build their application. But if I'm wrong, right, and there's actually like a few things that are not there, like I would definitely love to know. Like I do think there's, yeah, as you said, like the last couple of years I've seen a lot of investment in infrastructure, so that shouldn't be the case. Then I think maybe the next, yeah, I guess actually the one thing I would maybe tell builders is like get feedback from your users as quickly as possible, right? Like I think crypto in general still is a space where like people theorize a lot about like, oh, this is what people care about, or like, oh, you need this level of security or this level of decentralization, but people always forget like, oh, you still need, right, like the UX of things and like, yeah, I think I was working on like Silicon Valley Web 2 things before, and like I think what like we had perfected kind of like over the years there is just like this kind of relentless product focus of thinking about like, hey, who has this problem? How are you solving it? How do you communicate kind of the value prop to your users? And I think sometimes Web3 builders are not thinking about this enough, right? And so that's what I probably would say. Like my feedback to developers would be like, hey, yeah, like find the fastest way to basically validate your hypothesis.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point because I feel like a lot of like technical, especially the technical builders, they sometimes like ignore what users really need, right? Yeah, totally agree. And yeah, maybe the last one is not like a question; it's more like a challenging. Okay. So we know that you can speak 3 different languages, but no Chinese, right? Yeah, so I can teach you how to say in Chinese, welcome to build on Hyperlane. Would you like to try it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's like 欢迎来 Hyperlane build. 欢迎 like welcome, like Hyperlane build.
Hoai Hyperlane build.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, pretty good. Thank you. I think we can just wrap up here. I think this is all of the questions. I think people will know like Hyperlane more and also you more. And I think, yeah, maybe in the future, more builders will build on Hyperlane. Yeah, all good.